And we are off. Lisa, Jack, good to see you guys. Welcome, everybody. As you come in, my name is Dean Cottrill. I've got Lisa Picardo and Jack Miller here, and we are excited to be able to present to you. And we're going to talk slow as we go through this first minute or so, because we have quite a few people. We had almost 500 people sign up to be on this call. So we're going to allow everybody to come in. Lisa, how are you today?
I'm awesome. Great to see you.
Good. Jack, good to see you.
Doing great. Yeah, I'm pumped up for today. We had, obviously we've been working on this for a while and did some good finishing touches last night. So I'm excited. This is gonna be a good event for everybody today.
Yeah, this is powerful. It's very timely. I think that shows by the number of people who've signed up. We're actually coming across the country too, right, Jack? You're in California. Lisa's in Denver, around Denver in Colorado, and I'm on the East Coast in Maryland. So we've got the country covered pretty much here in the U.S.
Well, and
Chris
Riley, Chris Riley,
Portugal, right?
Who's our technical director, is in Portugal.
No,
so
he's actually in Paris right now.
In Paris. So nice. Good. Yeah. So anyway, we've got a Central European time zone represented on the T3 side. So nice job making this happen from lovely Paris. So seems awesome. Like the hot spot. Everybody's going there this summer.
And Olympics are 2024, so that's everyone's conversation right now here.
Really?
Yeah.
That's good.
Great.
That's exciting.
Here in Colorado, it's all about the Nuggets. Go Nuggets. Isn't that amazing? Yes. 47 years. They never won.
Long time to be thirsty.
Yeah. It's a big deal.
Well, as we get
Dean,
into,
I think let's get rolling. Here. I mean, we got a good group, several hundred people in here, so let's get started.
Good. All right, so let's dive in. We're gonna, we have a special presentation, as you can see in the title here. This is timely. We're going to dive in, and Jack's going to do a wonderful job on giving us an overview of the updates and what's happening in those lawsuits that are dealing with the buy-side compensation, and we're going to talk about buyer agency and go in depth and share with you best practices, things that could really help you today, not tomorrow, depending on what happens, but what are some things you can actually enact today to actually have an impact to prepare for anything that might take place in these lawsuits, but also, to make sure you guys can come out and win today more so than where you are sitting today. So with that, we're going to move forward. We're going to start over with an overview of the organization. And then Lisa and I'll do a little overview of us, and then Jack will do the same as we move into it, so you'll know who's talking to you, because some of you might not be familiar with T360. So who are we? One of the things that I always say is you think about a McKinsey, that's a consulting organization that's global. We're not global, but we actually do work with clients around the world who come to us, and we really operate within the North American space, from Canada, US, the Bahamas, Mexico, and we support really franchisors, brokerages, real estate associations. You can see the list there. It's quite a bit. We have multiple divisions. I'll share with you some insight in that, but we're really a trusted advisors within the white picket fence of residential real estate.
Yeah.
Anything else you guys want to add as I go through this, Lisa and Jack? Please do.
I think our focus, Dean said it well. Our focus is on residential brokerage industry. And those of you that know us from publications or speaking know that that's kind of where we come from. I think everyone here on this call has run a brokerage or a franchise or been part of a franchisor, or, so that's where our team comes from. And I pulled up a slide on our team. We're about 40 people in total across our organization with 18 senior leaders. And the leadership here has been everything from, a franchise executive, MLS executive or CEO, association executive, has worked inside of a brokerage organization or been an executive over a brokerage. So that's our background. Those of you that are new to us, that's where we shoot from. We think from the perspective of the industry, because many of us have been in the chair you were in or have worked with executives in the chair you're in for the majority of our careers, and that's who we are. That's the kind of resource that we are. And then we're probably best known for our research and publications. We publish 2 publications a year: our trends report, which is usually the top trends that are impacting the residential industry, and then the Real Estate Almanac, which is a who's who directory of all the companies that are in the real estate industry. And we published that in the spring. And as a matter of fact, that's just coming out in a print edition later this month. It's already live at realestatealmanac.com, but there's a print version that will be released, I think, right around the 1st of July. So,
Great.
so that's it.
So now that's who we are. Now we'd love to hear who all is on this call. Chris is going to put up a poll. And if you could share your role, that would be great. We'd appreciate it. He will share the results here shortly.
Awesome. Yeah, it'd be good to know who's in the audience. I know we're going to have, it'd be interesting to see exactly what those numbers come back with. So ready, we're going to give you, 30 seconds here, give you some time as you jump in and fill that out, and then we'll come back to it. And then Jack's going to lead the conversation as we go through some specifics on the current pending lawsuits.
Yeah, I'll take us through this quickly, and while you guys finish the poll up, I'll kind of get us teed up and then jump in. So, this first part of our discussion today comes out of the 2023 Swanepoel Trends Report, which was released in December and of last year. And we spent time studying all of the different lawsuits that are in the industry, and we've been following these. So we have some updates for those of you that have been, kind of lightly following what's going on, or maybe not following what's going on. We'll be able to catch you up on the call today. So the principal thing that we are talking about in the chapter that we wrote in the Trends Report are what are these lawsuits? What are the things that are happening with them? And then what's at issue? And then what are the possible range of outcomes? Where could we end up with in a decision in any of these lawsuits? And so we're going to cover all that. After we do that, we're going to jump into a discussion about how to address it and what you can do now. And so we've got some really strong material on buyer agency and potential changes to buyer agency and what you need to do to be ready. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into that unless Chris thinks we're ready to share our poll results, which we can at any point. So. All right, so we'll start with what's at issue in these lawsuits. The main topic is the actual compensation structure, whereby the seller, via the selling broker and agent, offers compensation to the buyer's agent. Again, everybody here, you live this every day, so we don't have to go through how all the money is split up, and it's going to be particular to how your firm does commissions and all of that. So I don't feel like we need to spend a lot of time explaining the particulars of that because most of you are very familiar with that. As a matter of fact, many of you can do this math in your head on any home you look at. If you look at a home, you can go, okay, I already know what the broker's going to make on that because I'm the broker. I know what the agent's going to make. You already do this math in your head very well for your business model. So, but that is what is at issue in these compensation lawsuits. There are, we wrote about 4 of them. There are some copycat lawsuits that we have seen crop up since we authored the chapter and released it. So there are some lawsuits that we're seeing that are happening now that appear to be by smaller law firms that are going after individual brokers and MLSs in local markets. But these are the big ones. These are the ones to pay attention to because they have the staffing of these class action lawsuit attorney firms. These are the same people that went after the tobacco industry and have been after the automobile industry and have been after, asbestos and all these kind of, pretty big consumer claims are some of the firms that are behind these lawsuits. There are 3 seller lawsuits that are significantly of issue and a buyer lawsuit that we're tracking as well. All of the seller lawsuits make claims under some part of the Sherman Antitrust Act or state level antitrust acts. And the buyer lawsuits allege that the current commission structure has led to inflated prices. So I see we finished our poll. It's really interesting. So we got, I'll go through that real quick. We got about 1/3 of the people on the call are broker owners or broker leaders and managers. About 13% sales associates and agents. Well, this is very, very interesting. We got a real mix here of people. So that's great. So thank you, Chris, for sharing that. Yeah, we'll do another one of those. We'll do some of those about the actual material that we're going over as we get into it. So the dates, we've added some dates on here since we published. Moral does not have a trial set, but the one that I think everybody's watching right now is Burnett, formerly Sitzer Burnett, which was certified as a class action last year and has a trial in October. One of the things to note about the Burnett lawsuit is it's in federal court. It's in a federal jurisdiction, which means it can have more impact than just the state and more impact than just the individually involved, plaintiffs and defendants, that it actually can impact more broadly. And that's of great concern. If a decision is made in the Burnett lawsuit, it could potentially, the judge could come back and say, we understand the defendants are going to appeal, but I'm going to cause an injunction, or we're going to do something federally to change the way the commission works because we believe enough harm is being done to consumers to warrant it. So that's the one to watch right now. And it's going to trial in October. And so we expect to see some kind of outcomes potentially later this year. And so again, that's the one to watch. Let's get into the specifics of who's in these lawsuits. Probably none of you individually. So that's good. I don't think any of you have been named individually. Again, I don't know exactly everybody on the call, but typically the defendants have been large brokerage companies, and some MLSs have been named as defendants in these lawsuits. And we put the names of and this all came out of their court filings. It's all in the Trends Report chapter. Many MLSs have been named as co-conspirators. And so if you are not familiar with that term, what it means, basically it's a way for the plaintiff and the court to say, we're not coming after you right now, but we reserve the right to, and we're going to pause the statute of limitations so that we're going to wait to decide this case. And then we may come back and come after the co-conspirators as well. So being named a co-conspirator is not great. It doesn't sound great. It isn't great. It's not a lot of fun. So that's who's involved in this. Let's talk about the lawsuit allegations. And we read through all the different suits and categorized them into roughly kind of 4 categories of allegations to talk through, just so everybody knows. The first is that the way the commissions are tied together has inflated broker and agent compensation, or the way that they're linked, right? Is that it's causing more compensation to be paid by the consumer for real estate services. So that's an allegation. That it has caused clients and customers to be steered to listings where there's a higher commission offered, where it says there's a larger commission offered to the buyer's agent on this particular property, and that's causing agents to steer people to that. So obviously a fairly serious allegation. That it has hampered buyer agent compensation negotiation because of the kind of automatic compensation built in the MLS and the way the industry works, that buyers were unaware that they could negotiate their compensation. Now, many people that have bought homes before do negotiate their compensation, and I've negotiated it before I was in the industry, and I know people that have done it, but there's a lot of consumers that are unaware of it and haven't, and there are cases that the structure of the way that the compensation works prevents that from happening as often as it might. And then lastly, that the unilateral offer of compensation to the buyer's agent doesn't really take into account the skills or the actual services that the buyer's agent provides to their client. So if they are working with a buyer, you could have an experienced veteran of 20 years in the industry who's done hundreds and hundreds of transactions being paid the same as a person who was licensed, 2 weeks ago, and they're doing their first or second transaction and don't have the experience or maybe not the skill level or the services that they provide to the buyer agent. So that unilateral offer of compensation is a significant issue. So I'm going to take a breath here for a second and let my co-host comment if you have any comments on this, because I see they're both nodding. Guys, what do you think about the allegations here?
This is something that it's been out there. There's been some discussion about this. This is something that, this is why we're having this call. Frankly, there's a lot of, I don't know, the word is concern. And this is why this call is timely, because, there's definitely some momentum headed in this direction. And like you said, that Burnett case coming up as a class action in October. So, this is something to best be prepared. So if you're sitting there and saying, okay, there could be some potential, issues with some of these things that were raised in these allegations, and there potentially could be some change. We're going to get into some ways to prepare and make sure that you're prepared no matter what happens. If nothing happens, you'll be in a better place. And if something happens, no matter what it is, you'll be in a better place.
Yeah, for sure. It's good. Good. Well, let's talk about what's changed since these lawsuits got in motion, because there have been some changes that have happened. The National Association of Realtors did make some policy changes in an attempt to settle with the FTC and the SEC over these particular issues. First was an agreement to display buyer broker compensation on MLS websites. Note that doesn't affect most of you. Most of you said you're in brokerage or you're an agent. For most of you, that's not of impact. You don't have to display buyer broker commission on your website, but it is required to be included in your IDX feed, and you could choose to display it on your website. But MLSs, because if they're an MLS affiliated with the National Association of Realtors, then they're required to now, and that's one of the changes. The National Association of Realtors also has prohibited buyer brokers and agents from advertising their services as free. So you can no longer say your services are free, because they are in fact paid for in some manner.
Let me speak to that, Jack. In researching and looking at this, just what people are doing, I'm amazed at how many companies, and some very large reputable companies, that still have in their blog, or somewhere on their site about buyer brokerage, and that the services are free. Yesterday I probably saw 20 articles on people's websites stating that. So just something for you to all think about, revisit that, make sure that you're not marketing, buyer broker as free.
Yeah. That's a good note. And now is a good time to audit your materials, your website, anything you use with the consumer, and remove any of that language. And then lastly, the National Association has prohibited filtering listings that are sent to clients by buyer broker compensation. So you cannot put a filter in an MLS search and say only send them listings that are above a certain percentage of compensation. That is no longer allowed. And I truly believe that was an oversight, because you could filter on any field in the MLS, and some agents, were using it to do that, and that's obviously not good practice. And the National Association agreed and said that's not good practice. There have been some industry changes as well, which is several large brokers. RE/MAX has announced it will display buyer broker commission on their website. Redfin did as well. I think I've seen their websites. They have updated them to include buyer broker commission information on the web. California Association or the California Regional MLS started displaying buyer broker commissions before it was made a requirement for MLSs. And Anywhere Real Estate has called for the buyer broker offer of compensation to be made entirely optional, which, in most MLSs you can offer $1. So I would debate what's the difference between $1 and nothing, and it's not a lot. So I think that's not actually, in the big picture, not a big deal, but definitely has a different tone to it. So let's talk about, what does this mean to you as a broker, as a manager or leader, or as an agent? How is this likely to impact? Because in the chapter we wrote, we don't know how these cases are going to be decided. None of us are attorneys. None of us are sitting in the courtroom every day. We're aware of the motion that's happening, and in this case, and the momentum. So what we've done is we've outlined a range of potential outcomes. These are the outcomes that we believe are all in the span of likelihood, some more likely than others. So we'll talk about them. First is status quo. So in status quo, buyer's agent compensation is required, but it can be anything. That's what we do today. Buyer's agents can negotiate additional compensation as part of their contract, either with their buyer, or they can request additional compensation from the seller as part of the contract. So really no change. So not a lot to talk about there. Kind of the next row over is that compensation is decoupled but allowed, meaning that sellers offering buyer agent compensation is optional. And you may see some sellers deciding to not offer compensation. As a matter of fact, we're somewhat in between status quo and decoupled today anyway, because a lot of sellers are not offering much compensation to the buyer's agent. And those of you that have scanned through your MLS and you look at the variety of commissions offered, it's definitely not uniform, and hasn't been uniform for a while. So we're sort of edging in this direction where it's still required, but it's definitely can be a lower number from listing to listing, which is appropriate. It allows the seller to choose what they want to do. In this scenario, buyer's agents can negotiate compensation, through the seller's agent, and or compensation from their buyer client. can say on the front end, here's what I would like to be compensated, and we're going to sign a buyer agency agreement. Or as part of working with the seller, we can go back and say, hey, this buyer would like a closing credit concession to cover some of their costs of paying their buyer's agent. So decoupled but allowed. This is just a mark off of where we really are today, but a significant enough mark that it would warrant discussion about how you handle that change. And then the last is fully decoupled. This is the most extreme. This basically says sellers are prohibited from offering compensation to buyer's agents. Again, those of you that have been part of the whole buyer agency conversation dating back, 25 or 30 years now, we feel like we fought this fight already as an industry. This is putting us back where we're going to be in it again. So sellers are prohibited, not allowed. And buyers have to pay their buyer's agent out of pocket if they want to pay for representation, obviously creating enormous hardships for first-time home buyers or low-income buyers that may have a hard enough time getting the deposit together to just get the process started, let alone paying for services. So those are the range of potential outcomes. Lisa, Dean, any comments on this range of outcomes?
It's going to be interesting to see where we land. For sure.
Yeah, somewhere in here. We're going to land somewhere in here. That's pretty clear.
Yeah.
Great. All right. So let's talk about disclosures and contract impacts. These are some more specifics for you guys. There's going to need to be and will be likely more upfront disclosures of fees and commission structures. I think the whole industry should get used to this. We're going to be talking about it in the front end. Some states require it. Some states have an information about brokerage services that describes the services. I think there's going to be more fees, more disclosure of commission structures and all that. Explicit fees in both listing and buyer agency agreements. Usually our listing agreements are pretty buttoned down as far as that is concerned, but a lot of people have a buyer's agency agreement that doesn't really address the fee components or what they're paid in the instance where the seller doesn't offer enough commission to pay for the buyer's agent services. So we think that is a contract impact. And also changing how buyer's agents engage in 2 of the 3 scenarios we listed. There needs to be more conversation that happens between the buyer's agent and the buyer to agree to what happens and how they get paid on the front end. And that means everybody here is going to be talking about money sooner and more upfront with potential clients. And we've got a whole section we're going to talk about that. We think there'll be some broker compensation impacts. We may see new buyer agency services. We may see companies that focus on different kinds of service models to say, look, here's how we do showings now, or we take a retainer, or we have a different compensation model. So we expect to see that. We do expect to see a continued high rate of variable buyer broker compensation. We think these lawsuits moving forward means people are more likely to vary the buyer broker compensation offered if it is offered. And potentially more market-based and buyer and listing broker compensation. We might see compensation change significantly as the consumer begins to understand that they can negotiate more, or they can make more changes, or they're encouraged to make more changes by seeing the outcomes of these lawsuits.
Jack, we have a couple questions that pertain to this. In the fully decoupled scenario, could be that the buyer negotiate for the seller to pay their buyer agent's commission as a seller concession.
It's unclear how that would work, but that's probably a structure that we'll see, is that they'll end up being a structure for sellers to concede something or do things in order to say, well, I'm going to compensate for this in another way, doing a rate buy down or offering a seller closing credit. So I think there's mechanisms there. There's a lot of interesting conversations around how to finance the buyer's agent.
That was another one of the questions.
Yeah, and that's I know you reached out to some mortgage companies.
Dean and I reached out to a couple of lenders, and it's not even on their radar, frankly, like very few of them. And what they're saying is that it would have to be a closing cost. It would have to be rolled into the closing costs. Couldn't be financed, is what they're saying so far. So that'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, for sure. So I think there's still implications that are not fully understood that we're going to require changes to policy, regulation, and how both the lending industry engages and how our industry engages with the consumer. So we're going to explore some of that in the second half of this session. We believe there may be some agent and consumer effects of this. We think there may be fewer agents because of this. There are many agents that are not comfortable having that negotiation with their client or that sales conversation with their client on the front end. We have spent a lot of time training listing agents how to talk to their clients about their value proposition. The industry has not spent an equivalent amount of time teaching buyer's agents about how to represent their value proposition to the extent where the buyer would pay them out of pocket, or would package it in with their loan or whatever options become available for that. So there may be some agents say, I'm just not interested in having to figure this out, and I'm going to take this as my cue to exit. We do think in some scenarios it may limit the buyer pool. Again, not a great experience for a first-time home buyer or a low-income buyer. Hey, I'm buying a home for the first time. Your job is now to negotiate with your agent what you're going to pay him to help do that. Like that's a bit of a rough road. But I would also say an opportunity for some brokerages that may package the first-time home buyer experience and say, hey, we're willing to do it for a flat fee. We've got a really easy way to do it, that kind of thing. And there's an opportunity there for some brokerages that want to package around that, but it may limit the buyer pool. Lastly, or next to last, lower broker and agent compensation overall, potentially. I think we're going to find out. I think these cases are going to move us towards figuring that. Now, I will tell you, if you look at the publicly traded real estate companies, you look at the trends of agent compensation, it has been going down, for the past 15 years. So overall, we've been trending down. And so that's on trend. But it's just a question of, will this accelerate that trend? Will we hit a point where it says agents will just say, I'm not willing to work for less than that, and it plateaus? What's the question there? And I think lastly, one of the things that I think, the is kind of in the background of this conversation is, home prices are really, it's gotten expensive. It's much more expensive to buy a home today. And it's not clear that this is going to lower home prices. It may impact services that people pay for in the transaction, but it isn't clear that it's going to lower home prices. That's why I put a question mark there. It's really unclear whether that's going to happen. I think we're going to have to play through this one. So I got two takeaways, and then we're going to jump over and talk about on the buyer agency side what to do and how to handle this. So takeaways are, be prepared to explain and sell your value proposition to buyers. And if you're a manager or a broker leader on this call, this is what you're going to be helping your agents with. And by the way, you being on this call is a competitive advantage. You're going to be better prepared to have that conversation. The brokerages that figure out how to do this, how to train their agents, how to have constructive buyer agent conversations and create those agency relationships, the ones that figure out how to do it are going to be able to teach the ones that don't. You're going to be able to recruit buyer agents who don't know how to have that into your brokerage. You're going to be able to fold in or acquire companies that haven't figured this out. So you're on competitive footing just being here. The second piece is, and again, I think Lisa, you shared with me that somebody responded when we sent this out, like, just use the darn buyer agency agreements that you've already got, like, for Pete's sake, people. And we'll get into that. We're going to get into that because that's our next section is, this is an industry that has, I think, and again, I'm sure everybody here on this call, if you're a broker, all the agents in your firm, 100% of the time, get that buyer's agency agreement signed up front, all buttoned down. You've got a solid agreement. I'm sure that's true. There may be one or two of you that aren't doing that, and I'm really talking to you guys. But that it's reality that not enough buyer's agents are signing this in advance of going into contract. So that's a good transition over to
two other questions, Jack. Well, one, which
Sure.
I'll answer. Do we think that teams will start to have an advantage over solo agents? We do a lot of work with teams and team consulting, and many of them are already geared up and ramped up with their buyer agent to this regard for sure. So I mean, brokerages can also have buyer agents, right? And then this is more a question for you, Jack. Any thoughts around this resulting in lawyers displacing agents on the buy side?
Yeah, I mean, I've been in brokerage. I've gotten that phone call where it's like, hey, I'm an attorney. I want to represent myself. And then you explain all the non-attorney things that you have to do in a transaction. And they go, you know what? Actually, I would like you to do those services for me. I'll still, of course, read the contracts and, maybe we'll work out some other arrangement because of that. But I don't know. I mean, it's the attorney industry may be hungry for things to do, and they could look at this industry as an opportunity. But again, there's lots of things that they're not going to do, don't want to do, aren't in their skill set to do. Many of you, I think those of you that work every day with buyers and sellers know, like, there's a lot to this industry, and it isn't just the contract. It isn't just that's not the whole thing. That's one little piece of it. So attorneys may see that and they may dip their toes in the water, but I'm not confident they're going to say, oh, this is a huge opportunity for me. And unless, of course, ChatGPT or Bard puts them out of business, which is, that's a whole other conversation. So
that was one thing I was going to say to everybody is that I'm actually in the process of my wife and I selling our home here in Maryland. And you're reminded by going back through the process personally and working in the industry for so many years, 33 years now, you get numb sometimes to all the value you do bring to the conversation and to the transaction and how you support your clients and the consumer out there. And there are so many moving pieces and parts to this process. So basically as a takeaway, you got to hone in on that and dive into that and be able to explain that it actually is understood by the other party, the buyer in this space, in this example here.
Yeah, great. Well, I think I'm ready to turn it over to you, Dean and Lisa, on talking about exclusive buyer agency benefits and best practices. So we're going to do that for a little bit because this is,
Sure.
we need to firm up on that as coming out of like one of the best ways to get prepared for this is firming up on this. And then we have some additional conversation about how to handle the specifics of the change. So I'll turn it over to you.
I'm pretty passionate about this. I've had my accredited buyer designation from NAR probably for, I don't know, since like 2008. In part, I worked in a resort market. And in that resort market, I mean, for those of you that know this, I mean, buyers just aren't loyal, right? I mean, they're not loyal in many cases. And so it was not uncommon for somebody to, come into town, you drive them around for a day and show them everything. And then the next time they come into town, you're not available at 4:00 when the ski mountain closes, when they want to look at houses. And so they go with the listing agent and you're out, right? So in the market that we were in, it was really common that they posted a reduced buyer commission and all of that. So anyway, let's move on to some of the best practices. And one of the questions or the comments from somebody, the original Texas buyer broker, commented that, many agents work as a dual agent, right? And in the state I was in, that was not allowed. Dual agency was not allowed. And it's still the case in many states, right? So we're speaking a little generally. We realize that every state has different rules, real estate commission rules and forms and all of that. But there's a real benefit to the buyer of the fiduciary representation and loyalty, right? My son-in-law recently bought a house, right? And he called me, he was calling because he had questions. He was concerned about his financing. And I was like, well, who's representing you? He's like, what do you mean? I mean, he had no clue, right? And it was a transaction broker. So I was like, well, I wouldn't tell them your concern about getting a mortgage, right? And so you have to be really careful, right? You can't provide, benefits for the buyer are that you'll get advice on offer price and terms. If you're a transaction broker or working for the seller, you have to be very careful on that. If the list price is $500,000, you can't suggest to them that they offer $450 because you're working for the seller and your job is to get them the best price. As the benefit for the buyer is that the agent is negotiating only in their best interests, right? And then you're going to provide, and of course, every agent theoretically provides assistance throughout the process. But as the buyer agent, you're in a much better, you have much more capability to do that, to really provide them guidance and advice and counsel them in that way.
Yep.
Anything to add to that, Dean?
No, well said. Well said. We're going to look at the benefits now to the agent. You think about the benefits to you as the agent, or if you're the broker owner, to the agents in your organization, you're a team leader. So the buyer, of course, is committed. Some of these are like, of course, this, but this is where we're really going to compartmentalize and drill this down to the real basics and then be able to amplify this messaging to help your agents to be able to get these agreements signed early on. Valuing your time. Think about all the time and energy goes into this. If you kind of equated a lot of the time and energy of showing homes to someone you don't have a commitment to, and then they go off, like Lisa said, and work with somebody else, that's all wasted time. So this process actually will help them make sure they have a signed agreement with someone who's really committed to them. Clear compensation agreements laid out, straightforward. Here's what it's going to be. More productive and efficient working partnership. And that's part of it, is how to convey that. Try to think and just reverse the thinking in your minds if you would you take an open listing, meaning let anybody sell it and you're not going to get compensated unless you bring that buyer? You don't do that. You typically have an exclusive right to sell. And this is what we're talking about here, an exclusive agreement, buyer broker agreement with those buyers. And then the long-term benefits is the relationship building that core relationship, that commitment and trust factor that's going to benefit long-term from that relationship with that buyer, future SOI clients, customers, neighbors, things along those lines.
I'm going to ask Chris to throw up the poll while we touch on a couple more things here. I mean, the transactional brokerage, just think about it, right? It's transactional, right? This is all about that relationship, like long-term, you're going to be with them for the long haul, all of that. Yeah. So I think one of the other things, Dean and I talked about this the other day, was in an Uber, right? An Uber makes more money than half the agents out there, right? Because you're driving people around and not guaranteeing any sort of compensation, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So really think about the value of your time. We encourage you to track how much time do you put in, right, to a buyer. I mean, with listings, we see that all the time. You're going to have it photographed and staged. You're going to do all these things, but really list out all the things that you're going to do for the buyer so that you can sell your value. Let me just
and on this poll, if you're a broker answering this poll, answer this what you think the majority of your agents are doing, and be honest.
Right.
We want to kind of get a sense of where the group is.
We recently did a consult with a very large profit team that does hundreds of millions of dollars, and shockingly, they're really doing this. And they usually get a buyer agreement right when they're going to contract, right? Rather than right at the beginning. And he was like, wow, I never really thought about that. What a great idea to do it at the beginning. So just something to think about. Chris, do you want to show the result for the poll?
Yeah, if we have
might need another minute.
Yeah, let's give them another minute to fill that out. Let's do do's and don'ts. So let's start with do's.
Okay. So do discuss and sign an exclusive agency early in the process, right? As early as possible. And Jack is going to touch on some objections on that people might have to that regard, right? Present a comprehensive buyer presentation detailing your services. We're actually going to share some examples, and we're going to talk about best practices for that, but share that early on, right? Track your time. We talked about that a little bit.
Let's go look at houses this weekend is not a comprehensive buyer presentation.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Or just here's a guide of the communities, right? That's something else that people hand out, right? That's not enough. And then consider getting your ABR or having your team members or some identified designated agents that really do that, so that they can promote themselves as accredited buyer representative.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's
do we want to
don't?
Don't.
Here we go.
Yeah.
So wow, 44% coming in. I have one signed upon starting to work with the buyer. So that's awesome. It's great to see that number coming in.
I think that speaks to the quality of the T360 audience, that people that tune in 60 tend to be a little bit more professional and on top of things. So great job, guys.
We got 20% said don't and not applicable due to the role. Interesting. Okay. There are also, Chris, I'm curious, 155 total showing up, taking the poll, but there's 221 on the call. So are they just some not participating? Is that what it is?
Yeah, not everybody has answered it. Some people have held back. So,
all right.
So let's talk about don'ts. Take us.
All right, let's talk about don'ts. So don't say your services are free. We've kind of amplified that a number of times. We mentioned that a few times. So you want to make sure, and that's a takeaway as well from this call, is audit everything that you have, your materials, what you put out in your blogs, things like that. Make sure you review all that. You don't want to say your services are for free. Don't say your services will be paid by the seller. And don't be a transactional broker. I think Lisa just amplified that in the last slide. And don't devalue your services. Really look to think about, and this was in the do's, where you evaluate the second time energy that you spend to support somebody in the buying process, from the time you start looking and showing them homes and getting them working through for the lender and the title officer, whatever it might be, all the way through the home inspections and all the challenges and all the things that go on. When you look at that, there's a lot going on there. And so don't be that as the Uber driver I had mentioned, Elisa, thing like that. Really, you're a standout. You know what you're doing. You're a professional. Professionals get commitments for their time, their expertise. And so don't devalue your services. Really stand up And, you basically deserve a compensation for your efforts and your knowledge and your skills. So go for it.
Great. All right. Lisa, I think we're going to turn this over to you on buyer presentation best practices. So we've got
Yeah,
some good
so
material.
I get to see a lot of these. I do a lot of marketing reviews, part of our consult, but this is, but anyway, so I will tell you this, like, we're going to show, we are going to talk about the best practices, and we're going to show you a couple examples that we've seen, but they're few and far between that have everything on this next list that I'm going to talk about. Right. So if you have a buyer presentation, and Chris is going to put up a poll here shortly on that, we'd love to know how you rate yours, right? What should be included should be about your company, right? About yourself as the agent, or market insights and trends, average sale price, days on market, all of that. Community info, like the key communities that you serve. What's the process for a home buyer? It's very different than that for a seller, right? The explanation of buyer agency, your unique value proposition, service and support you provide as a buyer agent, client testimonials and results. Why don't we put up the poll, and then we'll put that up for a sec, and then I will move into a couple examples that we've seen that companies were kind enough to let us share.
So on the scale
great.
of 1 to 10, 10 being you're the best, your buyer presentation is awesome, off the charts. Where would you say your buyer presentation falls?
Right. Thanks, Dean.
Mhm.
Okay, so here's some examples. So go into the next one there. So here, Briggs Freeman, Sotheby's International Realty, one of their pages is all about them as a company, right? Like why them, the brand behind them, their numbers, all of that. Like really important to have that in the buyer presentation.
Yeah, great to establish that. Yeah, and then I picked this one. I picked a few slides from. We reached out to John L. Scott, and they have some very good material in theirs, and so I added a few slides in. They have information on the market, the housing cycle, what's happening in the market. They put out, and this is something I think that's very cool, a kind of a intensity email that goes out almost every week that says here's the intensity in the market, here's where we are, what kind of market is it. It kind of helps people understand that, and they set that up in the buyer's presentation to say here's where we work and here's the market we're in right now, and just know what that means for you, that there's going to be, if you're in a seller's market, there's less selection, there's more competition, maybe multiple offers, that kind of thing. And then the other piece I really liked that they had in here was a really good visual for like the entire process and going through the whole process. Again, this is one where, and we'll come to it in the objection handling and the sales process, but being able to help a person understand that they're paying you as the agent or your company's agents to navigate through this whole process, and that there's a lot of moving parts. And so the more succinct you can show it, but at the same time they go, wow, that's a whole bunch of different stuff we have to do in this process. I really do want help with that. That is going to help. That helps close the deal in terms of getting them to say, yes, I want to be represented and I'm willing to pay for it, because I don't want to have to figure all that stuff out on my own. Right. So that's that.
No,
so
good
Lisa, I think you
The next slide is a different visual of this same thing, the
different
buying
visual.
process,
Yeah.
like all the things, all the pieces that go into this, which are hugely important. Dean, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say on a talk track, if you go back to the last one and this one, they're both the same, but the last one, I like the circular approach here. You'll have some clients, that feel like, hey, home search, I can do that on Zillow, I can do that on Redfin, or I can do this or that. So because some of the mindset in your mind is, think of like a ladder having 10 rungs on it. Somebody who might feel like, hey, I'm at a 9 or an 8 doing my own home search, I really don't need you. There's a couple arguments I could say on that, but just say in their mind, they're sold on that fact. There's a lot of places as you go around there, they're not on rung 8 or 9. They're rung on 1 or 2 or 3. So the whole process that you can benefit them through that. And that's where you want to amplify and explain. Some people are really savvy, right? Quite a few people buying, some are more than others. But you're going to have some people stand up for themselves, say, hey, I'm really good about negotiating. Well, how about these other areas where you're going to actually add to and bring value to that transaction for that buyer?
Yep. And then
Yeah.
the last page.
I want to
go
know,
ahead.
we've gotten a lot of questions in this webinar, which
Yes.
I'm willing to stay on and try to answer questions at the end, because there's a ton of them. There's a
Yeah.
lot in here.
Okay.
So, but
Okay.
yeah, so let's do. So like this graphic, and then I think you wanted to show.
And then I
this
love
one.
this. Like, I think that this is hugely important. Why do you need a buyer's agent, right? And all the details that you're going to provide. So that should be in every one. Okay, so here is where we're at on the poll. So 10% of you let's see what is it?
The highest 8?
Yeah. So
Oh.
8, 7 and 8, it looks like the highest, nobody feels like theirs is a couple people feel like theirs is a 10. So still
Yeah.
work to be done on buyer presentations. Thanks for sharing.
Mhm.
Okay.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about objection handling. And I'm going to cast some of these objections in the light of what may be coming out of these lawsuits, where we are going to need to get clients to sign an agreement on the front end that says how they're going to pay the buyer's agent, right? That is what appears to be on the menu. So we're going to dive into that. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Before that, I'm going to talk about fundamentals of objection handling. And this is, if those of you that had sales training, this is taking you right back to that. First, acknowledge the objection and say, I hear you. I understand why that you're saying you don't want to sign. And I'll go through, we've got some example objections we'll run you through. Secondly, go back to the value of the service. Most objections come from a place where they don't understand the services being provided. They don't understand the time and effort that goes into providing those services. They don't understand what they would have to do if they were to do those services themselves, right? Or if they were going to have those services fulfilled in some other ways, what the impact would be. So you want to make sure to say, let's go back and I want to take you through and make sure you really understand what you're declining, right? We think in this market we're moving into with potential changes, you may need to offer strategic alternatives. And some of you are going to say, well, what's a strategic alternative? So a strategic alternative is a trade that's acceptable to you and to the client that moves the relationship and the transaction forward. And I'll give you some examples as we go through some objection handlers. And strategic objectives, I put a note there. These are specific to you. These are things that you've decided to do in advance and said, look, if a person is not willing to sign with me as an exclusive buyer agent in this contract, then there's other things I will offer them that will move the relationship forward, but strategically will move them in the direction that they need to go for themselves and that I need to go to respect and value my time. So these are very important. Most people's only strategic alternative, and it's not very strategic, is they say, fine, I'll do it without the compensation that I know I should be getting to feed my family. That's most people's go-to because they don't have a strategic set of alternatives for different scenarios, especially moving into a period where the buyer agent compensation may not be guaranteed. So we're going to talk about those. And last, be prepared to walk. Some people are not going to pay for services and they don't want to, and they need to go struggle with the market for a while. Your strategic alternatives ideally keep them from doing that. Say, look, I'm going to give you something, you're going to give me something, and we're going to work together for a while. And then they may end up in an exclusive agency agreement with you after a period of time. So let's talk about common, and I know there's a lot of objections. We got a few here that we're going to cover quickly.
Right.
This one is objection. I'll do it myself. I want to represent myself and save the money. Okay. We're going to hear this one. Some of you hear it already. I've heard it already. I've talked to attorneys who want to represent themselves, all that kind of stuff. Objection handler. First, let me walk you through the steps in the process so you understand the work involved. Again, take them back to what the services provided. Here's what I'm going to do for you. Second, representing yourself may not end up saving you any money, may end up costing you money. Lots of reasons for that. They're not in the market all the time. They don't know what goes into the negotiation. They don't know what's common to negotiate, what's not common to negotiate. They don't know what is reasonable to ask for and what's difficult to ask for. They don't know maybe not know to ask for, interest rate buy downs or other different concessions that can be made in a transaction. So you can save them a lot of money by saying, look, I'm in market all the time and we see what's going on. I'm going to save you more than my fee is going to cost you. And just with that, an alternative. And again, this has got to be specific to you. I'm not saying this is for everybody. But in a scenario where you've got a person who's just going to do it yourself, you could say, you know what, I will unbundle my services. And if you want to do a few set of things just with me, I will do those with you. And then if those are working for you, like that might be an agreement to pay on I will show you 10 houses and you're going to pay me X amount of dollars for that work. Like that could be. Now, again, I'm not saying that you should do that, but this is saying, look, here's the way I can unbundle my services, again, acceptable to you, and moves the relationship forward with the client. So that's an example.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, next one, objection. It's a lot of money.
Can I say my quip? You're right. I should just work for
what's
free.
your quip? Yeah.
You're right. It's a lot of money. I'll just work for free.
I'll just work for free. It is a lot of money. It's too much. I'll just do all this work for free. Okay, so we will get that objection. We get it today. It is a lot of money, right? It can be. Seems like a lot of money to pay to buy a house. All right. First, take them back to the value. Say, I want to make sure you understand the value of the professional services and how they'll ultimately save you money by working with a professional to get this transaction done. And second, I don't get paid unless you buy a home, right? You actually have to do something. I'm willing to take a risk with you, sign an exclusive agency agreement with my compensation specified if you buy a home, and I'm willing to put my time on the line. If you decide not to buy, that's okay with me, right? So that's how it is. Strategic alternatives might be things like a retainer with a success fee and say, look, I understand you don't want to pay that. You feel like that's a lot of money. How about you pay an upfront retainer and I'll provide some services for that. And there maybe is a smaller success fee at the end if we get a transaction done. That can work. I'm not saying, again, that doesn't have to work for everybody, but it could work for some of you where you say, you know what, it takes the risk out. You get the money up front. And if the person decides not to buy, it's okay. You got some money on the front end in form of a retainer. So that's an example of a strategic alternative. You have to pick ones that work for you.
You also,
So
on that topic right there, you also could go down the path of breaking down what those dollars go toward. A good bit's going to go to taxes, whether you're in the agent talking about it goes to the broker, things like that. So some of it's to this or overlying point is sometimes people just don't know. So when they see that big dollar amount, they think you're getting all of that, and so on and so forth. Really maybe educate them on where all that goes.
Yeah. Look, there's insurance, there's taxes, there's all of the moving parts, and they don't know it. So that's absolutely correct.
Yeah.
Third one I've got, I want to keep my options open. Says I don't want to work with just one agent. So this one, I think actually, I like this for this market right now. In a competitive market where you have one listing for every 3 agents, it takes time and attention to win the home you want. We've definitely seen that. I think buyer's agents earn their compensation the last few years with these multiple offer situations.
Yep.
It says like, I can invest my time and skills when we work in a partnership. And I know that by investing that time, I will get paid. Right. And that's it. It's a very competitive market. Even now, lots of markets are back in multiple offers. Strategic alternative is having specific or limited agency. This is saying, look, how about I'm going to show you these houses. And if you decide to buy any of these houses, then I will get paid. And if you'd want to do more of that, then we'll sign an additional thing that says we're going to go look at additional houses. And at some point, your client's going to go, well, this is silly. Why don't I just sign an agency agreement and we just do it? Because now I don't want to sign a piece of paper every time we need to go out and do showings. And right, so that's it. So that's an example of a strategic alternative. Last one I've got for you is objection that I don't want to commit. I don't want to commit to one agent as you may not always be available. This one, again, this is one to work out with in the context of your specific situation as an agent, or if you're in a broker, how to help your agents with this. This is why I work with a partner, the team, the brokerage. That's why I've got other people around me that are available to help you if I am not. And I think that's another way to get past that. Another strategic alternative here is unbundled services. We talked about it before, but there's other ways to work with that, but that gives you a narrative how to approach that. So those are some of the ways to handle. Again, there's probably, we could probably do another 50 objections that people get. I know there's a bunch that I had in mind that I said, look, I'm going to keep it down to, 3 or 4 for this audience.
These are some of the biggest ones.
Yeah. There's some big ones. And by the way, developing those strategic alternatives, developing like what happens when I explain the services and the value proposition and where all the money goes and all that kind of stuff goes, and they're not willing to move forward. What do I go do then? And especially in an environment where if you're not guaranteed to be paid on the buy side, unless you get something signed up front, which appears to be the direction we're headed as an industry, which by the way, better anyway for securing your relationship. Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how T360 can help. There's some things that we can do. If you're watching this and you've been with us for this whole time, which many of you have, then there's some things we can do for you. One of the things that we are working with people on is a buyer agent assessment program. And this is doing an evaluation of the buyer agent part of your business and in light of potential changes to the way the buyer's agents need to interact, in light of your specific state and the requirements you have in your state and how your state works, where some states obviously have different requirements than others, different practices, right? So some of it's regulation, some of it's how things are done in your market. So really looking at that, we'll come through and look at these different areas in your business, your agency agreement, your buyer presentation, your sales process, the objection handlers you use, your agents use, and also what your strategic alternatives are. Let's pretend this federal case happens in October and a decision is made sometime in Q4, and the judge comes back and says, I'm going to issue a federal injunction and not allow buyer's agents to be paid by the seller via the mechanism that we're all using today. We're trying to get you ready in case a worst case scenario happens. But the good news is by doing this, you're going to go through this process, and then all your materials will get better. Your buyer's agent scripts will get better. The sales training will be better. You'll have strategic alternatives if things like that do happen. You'll be set up. I know, Dean, you and I and Lisa talked about looking at everybody's commission rates at what they're doing currently,
Yep.
And then including an executive summary and recommendations of the specific improvements based on our review of materials, the sales process and everything that you're doing with your agents. So we're offering that as a help for people that want help with this. We think this is a good time to do it because we could have decisions in Q4 that impact your business. And it isn't the fall that kills you. It's that part where you hit the ground, right? So we want to give you a parachute so that if there is a fall, you might take a fall that you've got a parachute on.
And if you want to look at this and see potential, the pain that might come is make sure you break out your current commissions on buy side, list side, and look at that buy side commission and what that equates to in your organization. And that'll be a real cold shower. It's like, wow, that's a lot. That's a decent amount of money. You also potentially could see, and we work with clients, that it's you're underperforming right now. Maybe you're low on that side. And so this is something that actually help to move that and work with the agents to be more proficient in this space.
Yeah, I think the good news is on doing something like this is many of you have buyer agent commission challenges today because of the variable compensation being offered. And this gives you a tool that you can improve today, even nothing changes, even the scenario where everything's status quo, that you can improve your buyer agent program in your brokerage or for yourself today by going through this. So that's that. A couple of other options that we want to make people aware of just while we've got your attention. We are forming some new T3 leadership circles. These are circles to help people go through different market cycles and different changes in their business. They're run on a 6-month basis, and they're put together with non-competitive brokerages and teams. This is a relatively new program that we've just put together. Focuses in the next 6 months are on changes to buyer agency, merger acquisition opportunities in a slow market like we are today, reducing expenses, low inventory, business strategies, how to handle a low inventory market. So we're going to be working on those. And then, Dean, you have a T3 Fellows executive MBA program. I know that's starting up. That's starting up is it September? We have our next group.
Yeah, we only run this twice a year, and it's one we've had a lot of success in working with brokerages and large teams on. It's an MBA style program. So you think about, in many of us in our space, didn't come out. I came out of college with an accounting degree, didn't come out with a degree on how to run a real estate operation. So in this, most of us moved in because we had a lot of success in sales or whatever it might have been. And now you're running a real estate operation. So this is a step-by-step MBA style program on how to run a more efficient, more profitable company. It's t3fellows.com. You can see the web address there. It'll give you some insight into those 10 key areas that we walk through and work with organizations on. And it's actually non-competing brokers, non-competing teams. So we make sure they're geographic exclusive. And we have a nice group together and work together in both group settings and one-on-one consults with Lisa and myself to help support you and your brokerage or your team.
That's great. Great. Yeah, and I think next steps out of this call for those of you that want to take a next step is to schedule a meeting with Dean or Lisa. I think Chris Riley posted a link into the chat if you want to talk to us further about this issue or about how to assist your organization with it. I'm happy to jump over to questions for a little while.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah, I think because we did have a lot of questions come up in this call. So let's flip through who I'm kind of going, I'm starting at the top and working down. So we hit many of these. I think we have hit already. So I'm going to just mark some of these off. If you guys see one, Dean or Lisa, feel free to
Somebody asked, how does the real estate model in the U.S. compare to other international markets as it pertains to buyer agency? From what I know, internationally, it's pretty common to get buyer agency because the compensation plan is very different there.
Yeah, most of the international markets, they do not have the MLS. They don't have a they do not have the pre-agreed to sort of structure that we have in the US.
Mhm.
And so, people are they're considered customers of the listing broker. They'll go to the listing broker and they're buying directly from the listing broker. And there really isn't an offer of cooperative compensation in most markets like in Europe. The only places where it's not that way tend to be Commonwealth countries, like South Africa. They have an MLS there. That's obviously Canada, which here in North America is very similar, basically the same system we have. But it's pretty unusual where we fought that fight here in our markets to create buyer's agency as a value proposition so that buyers are properly represented in a transaction and not just customers of the listing broker. So what else we got in here?
What about agents that work with buyers who don't have an agency agreement, just a facilitator? So that's pretty similar to the other question. Somebody commented that Florida is a transaction brokerage state. So I think both of those are pretty similar, right? And that's the whole point of trying to get that buyer agency. And
I would say one of the things to think about too, and we mentioned this earlier, is this is a business that you're in. This is kind of, Jack had alluded this as one of the potential outcomes is you're going to have less agents. So really, this is where you see a lot of separation, a challenging market like right now where listings are down, units are down because of the listings and the inventory being down. This is where you can really do separation between you and the competing broker in your market, where you can separate yourself in that value prop and generate more business and things like that. So being able to refine your dialogue, stand up for yourself, understand you might have to walk away from a few, but the long-term benefits are going to far exceed the short-term losses potentially that might come about.
Yeah, and I just want to emphasize, if a buyer's agent right now in 2023 is relying on the guaranteed compensation offered through the MLS because of the current structure, that's what this whole webinar has been about, that is likely to change in some form. And so you should not rely on that, right? You need to rely on your skills and your ability to work with a client who will pay you for your services. That is the shift. And for some buyer's agents, that's going to be a big shift. It's something they're not really well. So that's that.
Yeah, don't wait. This is our point too. Don't wait. Start moving.
Yeah,
what other questions? Anything else? Everyone hates lawyers.
There needs to be clarification between agency versus employment. I may have agency, but that doesn't mean I get paid. How do you showing that differentiation?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that. I mean, when you're as an agent, you're an independent contractor. It's not employment, and so it's you're being paid via contract, and you've agreed to terms in a contract between parties that say, here's how I am paid for these activities. And so that's what it is. It's not employment. And certainly you're not paid on a W-2 by your broker in most cases, if you're an independent contractor. There are, of course, some agents that are paid on a W-2 and do work that way. And that may be, there may be some opportunities there for some brokers that want to employ agents, but traditionally that's not been a broad practice in our industry. Because it doesn't handle market cycles very well. It's very hard when you have a committed salary and no transactions. So
somebody asked if you can make the agreement property or date specific. Absolutely. And I think you spoke to that in the objections.
Yeah,
there's also a question in here. I see Margarita's in there. Hey, Margarita. A question came in. Legally enforcing buyer agency agreements is not easy through either mediation or in the courts. True, but that's something that you don't walk away or don't do this. This is definitely, they are enforceable. We actually have many court cases have been won on buyer brokerage agreements. So that's just to address that question.
Yeah. I mean, saying that every once in a while a person jumps out of an airplane, their parachute doesn't work, doesn't mean I'm not putting on a parachute.
Right.
So I'm putting on a parachute. And when people agree to pay you for services, that's again something I think in helping you review for your particular situation. We may recommend an attorney you talk to. You may already have an attorney. There's some things that need to be reviewed specific to your state, specific to the regulations that you're under, to address the particular nature of what you need to do. But the goal is to get where you can guarantee compensation by working with a buyer. That's the end goal. That's the purpose of it. So.
Right.
Good. I'm still seeing a lot more questions. And so let me see if there's any of these others that kind of line up with everything. Says, how does one manage working with a buyer broker's agreement and the client decides on a property listed by an agent in your brokerage? This automatically makes you a transaction broker. Again, that's a good question to say if it's another agent in my broker. That's a state level concern. And I think that's something that, depending on how your state structures being a transaction broker, that would need to be addressed specifically in your buyer agency agreement as to what happens in that scenario. And you may have it. It may be in your agreement already. I wouldn't be surprised. When people have sent us agreements, a lot of times there's language in there. And the real problem is agents aren't explaining it, or they're not using the agreement. And so they get to a situation where they realize they don't really have an agreement with the client whereby they get paid. So it actually reinforces the need to look at that scenario, because, if the MLS is not going to guarantee payment through the compensation structure, then you need another mechanism. You need some other mechanism. So that's part of why we'd recommend, looking at that mechanism.
Yeah, I think one way you can wrap your mind around it, some of you, is commercial, in the commercial space. So in the commercial space, that's something that you basically get a buyer who's going to sign an agreement to work with you on going out to spend time and energy to help support them in whether it's leasing or buying of a commercial property.
Yeah, it's very similar. The commercial world.
There's a question on that too. I just saw that too about comparison. Yeah.
Yeah, in the commercial world, it is a little more freewheeling in the fact that, people that want to be represented on the buy side usually are paying for that representation. And still, there may be an ask for some concessions made on the seller side in order to cover the cost of that representation. And there's a lot of concerns in commercial that are different in residential, but that structure is very common. And those of you that practice commercial, which there may be some on the call, you probably know a lot more about it than I do. And that, but it's not unusual in that scenario. So.
Yeah, and Adam had a question here. Are you able to explain hey, Adam, what are you able to explain the difference between exclusive buyer agency agreements and buyer services agreements, and what the differences are? And that's specific to Canada, which ties kind of Jack's comments on some of the states in here and everyone having some differences within each of the states. So
yeah, so I don't know if I can explain it specific to Canada, but many states and provinces in Canada require something signed on the front end, which is usually information about brokerage services that says, here is how agency works, here's how people get paid, all that kind of stuff. But it usually lacks any commitment. It's just a disclosure. It's saying, I've disclosed to the client, here's how things work, but it doesn't bind them. It doesn't say, I'm exclusively working with this agent, and that I will compensate them if I buy a home using their services, right? It doesn't bind them. So disclosures are very different from an agency agreement in that respect. And that's what's usually when they say, well, what are the differences? That's a real principal difference. Are you actually an exclusive agent of the client, or have you just disclosed to them how agency works? And if you just disclosed to them how agency works, you're not guaranteed compensation. Like you don't have an agreement to hold them to for compensation. So it's great.
I think
again, back to like each state has very different rules, and that you have to start there, right?
I will note we had an agent or a broker from the Seattle market where buyer broker compensation was made optional by Northwest MLS, which is a non-National Association of Realtor MLS. She says that the overwhelming number of listings still offer comp, which is true. And I've talked to, Tom Hurtlebrink about that, about a month ago. There are some places in Canada where that is true as well, where it's optional, is my understanding. I interviewed some brokers about that. And from what we can tell, that is a likely scenario we end up in, is people continue to offer compensation because they recognize that the buyer will have some services they need to pay for on their side, and that they'll want to offer it it just becomes another term of the contract. Mm-hmm. So we could end up there, but it may be with some transition costs. It may be with some, agents still need to talk about their services. And I would still emphasize, still need to sign a buyer agency agreement so that they are binding their client. When Northwest MLS made that change, they released a buyer contract that spells it all out, says, here's how I'm working with you as a buyer's agent. Here's how I'm going to be paid in all the possible scenarios. You know, if the seller offers commission that's less than what my fee is, here's what happens, all that kind of thing. So very, very good example. We debated sharing that example on the call today as an example of where we might end up industry-wide. So it's very good. So guys, I think I'm running to the end of the time I can
Thank you all for staying late too.
Over. Good attendance today. Lots of questions. And if you would like some follow-up, I'd encourage you to reach out to Dean and Lisa. And again, thank you for coming. And then Dean, you had one last thing you wanted to say for the group about.
We're going to have a summer of love / support, and that is from T360. One of the things we did actually back, and it was for our clients back when the COVID hit in March of 2020, we started doing weekly calls, and we feel like we want to start doing that here with this call, launch it, and then go into a weekly call between now and the beginning of September. Then we kick off our fellows program in the beginning of September. So we're going to do that every week. It's going to be on this day, same time. Same channel, same everything. So we're going to be doing this. We're going to pick topics. We're going to have.
They're going to be on LinkedIn Live, actually.
Okay,
right?
Yeah, on LinkedIn
Yes.
Live. There'll be invite that come out. Information will come out. So if you have interest, we'll have a key topic. It'll be not an hour. It's going to be more of a flash.
Like
what we call
15,
flash.
20 minutes. Yeah.
High value, high content, good interaction, information provided. So I encourage you to join us on LinkedIn Live starting next week, and you'll see some details coming out about that where you can sign up to be on that.
It's great.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Y'all have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you on future LinkedIn Lives and Zooms and chats and FaceTimes and text messages and all that.
Thank you.